Good morning. Good morning, everybody. If you are visiting here today, I feel like I need to say that we do have men on our staff. We are like an all-lady team today. In our church, we try to give mothers the day off and give our dads the day off. So it's like an all-lady crew. Mostly, we had some gentlemen in our band, but we need affirmative action here for men at our church. I'm joking. But happy Father's Day. My name's Becca, if I haven't met you. I just want to bless you guys that are dads in this room. You know, we make such a big deal out of Mother's Day, and you guys kind of get the short end of the stick. Let's just be honest. I feel so blessed because my dad is an incredible man. I love him. I'm actually wearing this little ring today that he bought me when I was 13 years old. And it wasn't a weird promise ring. Don't worry. Don't get worried about that whole era. It was just a sweet gift to me as I was turning 13, just saying, affirming me. And I just love my own father. Have two big brothers that are incredible dads. Obviously, I have an incredible husband as well. But I have noticed in this church, watching so many of you with little kids, we have some incredible dads in this church home. We do. You guys are in there, doing all the stuff with them. We are so blessed. And I just think we have a higher number of just incredible fathers. But I also know that this day can be difficult for people too, right? Any holiday is hard that we have where we might have loved ones that we've lost. Fathering can be complicated. Families are complicated. And so we just are so glad that you're with us on Father's Day. Bless you guys. I am just grateful to have grown up in a home with a really immense amount of strong male figures around me. So thank you. And I'm sorry we have no male figures up here talking today to you, but they're taking the day off. So you get me. All right, well, I am going to continue this morning. I'm continuing in our series called Where Did They All Go? We started this series after Easter, and we've actually just been looking at the different apostles who followed Jesus because many of them became martyrs for him. And, we want to look at their lives and see, why did they become martyrs? What about their sort of life with Jesus made them that way? And, what helped them to live their entire lives basically sacrificing themselves for his resurrection. And so it's been really fun because we've been looking at the different ones, and I think what I've enjoyed about this series is that they all have pretty different personalities, and we can relate to them. You look at Peter. Last week we talked about Philip. I mean, how much do you guys know about Philip, right? Yeah, not much, but it was interesting to learn a little bit more about him, his practical side. Of course, we've learned about John. And today we're going to look at Matthew and we're going to look at Thomas. So we're going to have to move through them kind of quickly, but we are going to look at both of them. But before we do that, I was just curious if anybody here, do you guys ever feel sort of maybe like a fraud in your life at things you're doing? Like you go to work and you don't quite feel like you know exactly what you're doing, or you show up at church and you're like, I don't know if people really knew who I was. Does anybody ever have that? Even if you're completely capable and trained in what you're doing. Have you guys ever heard of imposter syndrome? Has anyone heard of imposter syndrome? Yeah, that it's sort of this psychological thought pattern where individuals doubt that their skills and their talents and their accomplishments, they just don't think that they're real, even though they might be real. Have you guys ever felt this way? Anybody? Is it just me? Just me who's felt this way? I think a lot of us carry quietly this sort of nagging feeling of inadequacy, that maybe we're not enough, we're not smart enough, we're not spiritual enough, we're not clean enough, maybe we're not consistent enough. I think it's something that we all feel. I mean, when do you really feel qualified for what you do? Right? Some of you guys graduated high school recently. Do you feel qualified to go to college now? Do you feel ready, or for your next training or your job or whatever you're going into next? Or if you graduate from college, do you really feel qualified to do what you studied? I mean, I think about medical professionals. I can't even imagine when they're training that first time they have to do a procedure on somebody. Oh, that's gotta be terrifying, right? You probably don't feel ready for it. Or, just becoming a parent alone, you don't have a baby one day and the next day you have one. And all of a sudden you're supposed to know what to do with these little people. I think a lot of us live our lives feeling like imposters or like we don't belong, like we're sort of watching from the outside, like almost a little bit like outcast, right? Watching and watching others who seem to understand what's happening. And I think we even feel that way in church. Like you come and you're watching the super Christians do the thing, and it seems like everyone else seems like they know how to pray or what they're doing, and you don't always feel like you belong. I know I felt this way many times in my life. I even felt it this week. But recently, I had this great opportunity to officiate a funeral for a really, really close family friend. This was like someone who was like a second mom or an auntie to me. And she passed away in March, and the family called and said, hey, would you come officiate this funeral? And of course, I said yes on the phone. And as soon as I got off the phone, I had an immense amount of insecurity just rise up. All of a sudden you're thinking, I'm grieving. Like, how am I going to be able to speak clearly, on her behalf? What did I just say yes to? Oh my goodness. And actually what really got me is I started to think about all the different people who are going to be at this funeral. It's one thing to speak in front of strangers. It's another thing to speak in front of people who've known you your entire life, or they knew you when you were young. So I start thinking of all these like family members and, people from my past who knew me when I was a little girl. And I felt so intimidated. It was as if like everyone they were going to be really tall and bigger than me, which is true. I'm not the tallest person. So some of them were taller than me, but I just felt like a little girl. And I was thinking, who am I to speak on her behalf? And I remember, I did all the preparations that you always do. And the morning of, I was literally looking in the mirror and I was like, I am 43 years old. I have 20 years of ministry experience. Like, I have done this before. This is not my first funeral. You've got this. Like, you're kind of pumping yourself up, trying to convince yourself that you're not an imposter, that I was qualified, right? And I think all of us have moments like this. We also have moments where we're not qualified and we actually don't know what we're doing, and yet God asks us to risk anyway, to try things. I think we all carry this sort of feeling with us. There's an article in Psychology Today from 2023 that basically is saying we're all insecure, okay? Here's what it says. It says, while it may seem that some people have their act together, deep down, everyone is insecure about something. Some people might be more readily willing to admit the feeling of inadequacy or unsure footing, but a sense of uncertainty or inadequacy does not discriminate and can affect everyone. In its most fulminating form, the feeling can come at you like a tidal wave. Isn't that true, right? We all have things. There's some areas you're like, you might feel really competent in, but there's always something that we check ourselves out. We're like, I just don't know. I just don't know if I have all the answers or if I'm smart enough. I just don't know. And the good news today is that Jesus, he actually calls imperfect people to follow him. Not because of who they are, but because of how he can help them to become who he's made them to be. He sees inside each one of them little pieces of his kingdom. And he looks at them and he begins to call little pieces out. And as they follow him, it's almost as if they waken up and they become the fullness of who they're supposed to become. And so today, when we look at Matthew and Thomas, we see two men that are honestly on the outside of everybody else. They're on the peripheral of sort of what's happening. They're like outcasts. And Jesus, he just has this beautiful way of seeing what other people missed, especially as he's gathering his disciples, right? He doesn't gather the sharpest minds. He doesn't gather the holiest saints. He calls to himself ordinary, flawed people, just like you and me, which is good news for us. So today we're going to be looking at them, Matthew the tax collector and Thomas the doubter. One who was hated for his choices and the other one who was haunted by all of his questions. So let's begin to look at how does Jesus keep calling people to him, even people like you and I, as we look at these two folks. There's this beautiful moment in the gospel that's really easy to overlook, and it's very simple. It's the simple two-word phrase, and it's follow me. Follow me. And it's not shouted, in the pulpit. It's not proclaimed on the mountain, but it's whispered. And it's whispered to a tax booth, like inside this little tax booth. And Jesus says, follow me. And it's spoken to Matthew, and it lands in his heart. Matthew was the outsider that Jesus invites in. It's interesting because the book of Matthew, the gospel, it's the first book of the New Testament that Matthew wrote, actually. He's one of Jesus' apostles. He doesn't talk about himself very much in his gospel. Unlike John, if you've read the book of John, John brags about himself a lot. He even brags about winning, seeing Jesus at the resurrection first. He's and the one who Jesus loved made it first. He calls himself the one who Jesus loved, which I sort of love about him. But that's a different personality, right? Matthew doesn't talk about himself in his gospel. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it makes sense when you're used to being someone who's really looked down on, who has a lot of shame. You're not inclined to sort of speak about yourself very much. And so really all we see about him in the Gospel of Matthew is this one verse in Matthew 9:9. He says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and he followed him. Isn't that so interesting? This man that literally gave his life for Christ only has this one little line about himself. And it doesn't tell us that much, right? But it's very sweet. This moment with Jesus, this little moment of follow me changed everything for him. He had a radical job change. The reputation in the first century of tax collectors was not just that they were disliked, they were despised because they were seen as traitors. They were Jews who were basically profiting and working for the Roman Empire and profiting off their own people. And, the Pharisees, who are the religious leaders, they considered them so contaminated, so spiritually dirty, that they weren't even allowed into the synagogue. So it'd be like us saying, you can't come to church. You are so dirty. He was such an outcast, so despised. And so he barely even speaks about himself. And when you think about that, Jesus calls him to himself. If we were going to be picking a group of world changers, we probably wouldn't be thinking this way, right? We want to think about who are the sharpest minds in our day. Who are the brightest? Who are the people that we can call to change the world instead of calling someone who's swindling their neighbors. And yet, he follows. I wish we had more commentary, right? From that moment of he says, follow me, and then Matthew just does it. How long did it take before he said yes? What were the insecurities he was feeling in that moment? And why? Why did he choose? All we can do is speculate, but, maybe he was really tired of feeling alone. He was just I'm sick of this. I'm alone all the time, and someone's actually asking me to come to be with them. I bet many of us in this room have felt isolated in seasons, right? We just feel alone. Are you sick of feeling alone? What does it look like to begin to follow in a different way? Or maybe it's that the money wasn't filling his void. It just wasn't filling him up anymore. He was, tired of it. A lot of us look for all kinds of success in other places, and we're trying to get our needs met in things that don't quite fill us. And maybe Matthew was just at that place where he's I've tried a lot of things. This isn't working. But maybe it was just that Jesus' voice was the only kind one that he'd heard in a really long time. Sometimes we just need to realize that no matter who we are, Jesus' voice can pierce through every aspect of our character, of what we've done, of what we've not done. And he can call us to be near to him because he's so kind. The scriptures say it's his kindness that leads us to repentance, that causes us to want to change. Whatever it was, he gets up and he follows. I think this is so beautiful because it's hopeful for you and I because Jesus sees more in each one of us than what we see in ourselves. The reality is that he calls us, you and I, to follow him. Now, there might be some of you here today that you've been coming for a little bit and you haven't quite done that yet. And he's calling you. He's saying, no, follow me. I see you. I know your name. I know how many hairs are on your head. I know all the things you've done, and I still want you. That might be you today. But to be honest, in a room like this, a lot of us are already Christians, right? We've answered that call, and we've said, yes, we'll follow. But I think we get a little lackadaisical when we start to get into that imposter syndrome where we think, I'm just not good enough. And we'll let those other specialized Christians do all the Christian stuff, right? And we forget to keep following him every single day with our whole lives, with the way that we show up at work, the way that we have friendships, the way that we parent. we just forget that he wants to be in every aspect of our lives. This morning, as I was praying for us, I felt like the Lord wanted to remind some of you that are Christians that a lot of times when I'm like, come on, follow him, you're like, yes, okay, I got to do the stuff. And we do want to do the stuff. We want to be inviters. We want to share the gospel. We want to do all of that. But I think there's some of you today that you need to be reminded that Jesus also shows us just a better way to live. And sometimes that's a way of rest. It's a way of slowing down. You know, it's actually Matthew, in Matthew 11, he wrote that Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That to follow Jesus is sometimes to actually slow our lives down, to enter into rhythms of Sabbath, to take a nap, to say the whole world is chaotic, but Jesus would pull away from the chaos of the world to rest in his Father. And I think some of you today who are Christians who've been following him for a long time need to recognize to follow Jesus is countercultural to how we live. And that he invites us into peace. He invites us into resting in him in the chaos, as the chaos of the world goes around us. And you just need to be reminded of that today. It's beautiful. We see that, you know, Matthew is so changed by this following of Jesus that the first thing he does is he throws a party. And I do love this part of the story. I mean, he's just so excited. He just wants to invite a bunch of other people in to see what he has seen, to experience what he has experienced. We see in a couple of different gospel messages in Mark 2 and Luke 5 and Matthew 10, the same sort of story where he has this party with a bunch of his friends, right? The wild people that nobody wants to hang out with, which I love that Jesus shows up in these places. And what we see is in Mark 2, you know, a lot of these people are already interested in Jesus, and Matthew just had to call the invitation. But they're already excited. They already want to, you know more about him, and he just has to say, come on, come and see. And then there's this other, you know, group that, you know, in Luke 5, Jesus is essentially calling people to repent, like turn from how you're living and follow me and come and hang out. And then in Matthew 9, at the same party, Jesus says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And essentially, he's doing the opposite of what the Pharisees are doing. And he's saying, I'm more concerned with spiritual compassion than I am your performance. And they have this great party. Jesus was showing us something better. He was showing us that anyone who needs grace is exactly who he's coming for, right? That he wants to work with us where we're at. He wants us all to be at the party. He wants us all at the table, feasting with him and laughing with him and enjoying it with him. And he wants us to be people who invite others into that as well. You know, if you're in our church and you have been following Jesus for a long time and you know him, summertime is such a fun time in Colorado to invite people in to what you're doing, to invite them into the kingdom, to have them over for dinner. I love that I actually see my neighbors now that it's like warm out, you know? Like, you're like, hey guys, it's been a while, you know? But it's so fun to just get to connect. And so, you know, in our church, we always in the summer think about how do we invite people in to what we're doing? And it doesn't just have to be this Sunday morning thing. Like, of course, invite people to church, but invite them to be near you so that they can experience Jesus through you. And again, you may feel like, I don't know, Becca, I'm not that great. You have no idea who is around you that just needs to be invited. They just need someone to be kind and to reach out to them and to just extend like a meal or an encouragement. You may not be that great, but the Lord is great, and he wants to shine through you, and he can. And so be thinking about that this summer with your you know, schedule. There's this just beautiful pattern that we see here in the Gospels where every tax collector that we meet in the Gospels, whether it's Matthew, it's the publican in Luke 18, it's Zacchaeus, they all end up humbled and they're changed, and they're wanting to welcome other people around them. And that's not just a coincidence. It is the good news. It is the gospel. It is the thing that we live for. And it's not about how you start. It's about whether you'll respond and whether you'll follow. And so I just wonder today, what's holding you back from following him? Again, maybe for the first time, we'll make time at the end to pray if that's something that you want to start for the very first time today. And then also for those of us who love and follow Jesus, what keeps us from following him? You know, the enemy loves to accuse. He loves to make us think that we're not worthy. He loves to get in your mind and make you think of yourself as very small. Because when he does that, he keeps you from being out in the world. He keeps you from experiencing the joy that God wants to lavish on you. don't let him have it. Don't let him do it. Just follow him and experience Jesus. Matthew shows us what happens when mercy finds us in our mess, but Thomas shows us what happens when grace meets us in our questions. There are some of you here that have a lot of questions, right? Like, this all sounds nice and woo and sweet. It's like, follow Jesus, he loves you. But there's some of us might be like Matthew, right? In our personalities. We just feel small. We feel insignificant. And we need to be reminded that God is with us and he wants us. But some of us, we have questions and we think a little bit more logically and we want to make sure that reality is making sense with the way that our mind does. And the beautiful thing about Thomas is that Jesus still shows up for the skeptic, right? He still shows up for Thomas. He gets a bad rap. I feel bad for Thomas, right? Doubting Thomas. What a sad reputation to have, like doubting Thomas. It's so sad. But doubting Thomas did some pretty incredible things at the end of his life for Jesus. So somehow that turned for him. But he gets a bad rap, but he is honest. He's sort of this honest pessimist. And we get 3 quotes in the scriptures about Thomas. And each one sounds just a little meh, to be honest. It just does. It's kind of who he is. John 11, Jesus wants to go back to Judea, even though it's dangerous, right? And Thomas, this is great. He's like, let us also go that we may die with him, which is pretty heroic, right? He's not afraid of death. It's also a little bit of worst case scenario. Is anyone else a worst case scenario person here? I totally do this. I will think of the worst case scenario to protect myself from pain, right? Because then you're like, if it doesn't end up happening that way, you're like, it was okay. It wasn't that bad, right? Some of us do that. And I don't know, is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? I'm not sure. But we're wired in a certain way to do that. There's another one where Jesus says he's preparing. Jesus is literally saying, this one cracks me up. I'm preparing a place for you in heaven, in John 14. And Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And I can imagine Thomas is sitting there and he's like, Jesus is talking, how do we transport? He hadn't seen Star Trek yet, you know? So he's like, I don't know, do we transport to heaven? How do we get there? He's essentially saying, I think we're lost. Like, you're saying you're gonna go here and we're gonna go with you, but physically, how do we get there, Jesus? I wanna understand, do our bodies, like the molecules, like suck up into the air? I don't know. Like, Thomas is just, it's a good question if you think about it. And then, of course, John 20, after the resurrection, Thomas says he won't believe unless he sees the wounds, right? Unless he sees Jesus' wounds. And this one kind of sealed his nickname forever. He's doubting Thomas. But to be honest, Thomas wasn't the only one who doubted. All the other disciples were doubting too. They just didn't say it out loud. They just weren't saying it, but they also doubted until they saw, right? They were like, what? Is he real? You know, they're running to find out, which makes it sound like they have faith, but do they? I mean, they're still running to see. Like, they want to see just as much as Thomas. He just says it out loud. And the beautiful thing is that Jesus meets him in his doubt. And he literally says, put your finger here, see my hands, and stop doubting and believe. And what I love about Thomas is he asks these questions and Jesus meets him in it. He turns his intellect and all the things that he's wondering about into actual reality. And what's interesting is Thomas says after this, the one thing that no one else has said. He says, my Lord and my God. He declares who he is. He isn't just believing, he's worshiping him. It's like as if all of it comes together in one moment. The reality is if you have questions about Jesus, like why you could believe in the resurrection, it's okay to ask those. I don't have time today to do some like breakdown to kind of like try to help you today, but it's okay to have an intellectual mind and to study. And the Church of Christ needs people who think this way, that aren't gonna just take whatever comes at them and be like, yeah, that sounds good, and like check their brains at the door, right? We need intelligent humans who ask hard questions. And the beautiful thing is, as there are intelligent people and all kinds of things that you can research and study, you know, archaeologists are still today, just recently even, finding more and more discoveries that are pointing to the reality that Jesus lived, that he walked this earth, and that he rose again. And so you have reason to believe, but it's okay to have questions and to be intelligent. And we want to bless your minds today if that's who you are. And the beautiful thing is according to tradition, Thomas, in the end of his life, later traveled to India and started the church in India. Actually, there are churches still to this day in India that celebrate Thomas as their sort of, you know, the person who came and established the churches there. He was martyred. He was killed to death by spears for proclaiming the gospel. And he expanded the church. I mean, you and I are still here today because of someone like Thomas, who went from doubting to literally dying on behalf of his faith. It's pretty powerful. So what do we do with Matthew and Thomas, right? What do we do with these two figures? One was hated for his job. The other was stuck in his head. One needed mercy. One needed proof. But Jesus saw something in both of them. And he didn't pick perfect people, right? He picked people who were willing, who were going to ask the questions, who would say, okay, I guess I'll follow you. Okay, I'll throw a party. Okay, I'm just going to be around you just to get to know you more. Jesus died and he rose again for you and I, not because we're perfect, but because he loves us and he wants to encounter us and he wants us to know him and he wants us to be formed by him and he wants to call out of you what he intended when you were created. Each one of us literally gets to bear his image to the world around us. But we hide it so often, we veil it because we're so insecure, because we have so many questions, we don't feel like we can fully live into it. And so today, I just want to say, what's holding you back? What's holding you back from fully following him, from resting in him, from following him for the first time, for being affirmed that you are someone who has questions and do worst case scenarios and feeling blessed in how God's made you?